And what a dummy! Here goes Don Will he go all the way? Oh, Dan cooked out Blossom, tipped him over. And done it all the way!
Welcome back to the Fantasy Rugby Draft podcast. Thanks for downloading and listening. I'm Bruce Wilkinson, and joining me again in the booth is the man primarily made of moth, Nathan Mossman. How are you, sir?
I'm the same as always, which I guess is debatable whether that's good or bad.
Indeed.
We'll leave that up to the listeners.
Indeed. We're recording this on Thursday, March the 3rd. We've got quite a few of the teams have come through. A lot of the South African, or most of the South African ones haven't been announced yet, but we're going to go through those team news. We'll have a look at some start-sit questions from a few people on Twitter and an email, and then we'll also have a quick look at who people were picking up in the week and who people were dumping, and a couple of trades that we've had tabled that we thought would put out to the audience and see what it said. A little bit of admin. You can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Rug Draft. That's Fantasy REG Draft. Drop us a mail at support at fantasyrugbydraft.com. Mossman is on at Nathan Mossman. That's right, mate?
Yep, I can be trolled there.
You can be trolled on there. Keep the reviews coming in. We do really appreciate the time you're doing that. We're spreading the web a little bit wider. As I say, we're getting a little bit of information to pass on. If you don't have the time, that's okay too. As long as you're downloading and listening. I guess, actually, Mossman, it's probably more important that you download. Don't really care if you listen, I guess.
Yeah, that's right, yes. It's all about stats for us, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, stats is our life. Right, let's crack into it. The first game up, Crusaders Blues. You put on Twitter, I thought it was quite apt. Tana Umanga hates your fantasy team.
Yeah. That's the only explanation, surely. No, it was a strange one, wasn't it? I mean, it would have had people rushing. I know it had me rushing to the waiver wire to look for a replacement for Mr. the week before. I'd said, look at the strategy that we came up with. It's working really well. Somebody like West is perfect for it. And then, sure enough, apple cart upset.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like Auckland did the 5 stages of grief. It felt like it was denial, anger, is it acceptance, depression? Well, acceptance might be last. Yeah, but it's something in there. Yeah, it was bargaining. Bargaining's the third, I think.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So it looked like the whole of Auckland went through that, and now I think we're at the stage of acceptance after 2 game weeks of Tana Umanga. We know that you're going to have to. You're going to be prepared for the highs and lows. I think he wants to play a squad, and he wants to practice what he preaches. Is that how you see it? Yeah,
I wondered whether this was a case where perhaps weeks ago that he said, this is what we're going to do in the first couple of weeks at least anyway. So it wouldn't have come as a surprise to the players perhaps. It was a bit of a surprise to everybody else. And there are a few articles written about this in the local press, sort of fairly critical, I think, of it. Just sort of suggesting, well, why are you doing this when you've just got off to such a good start? And I think they've got a point, but hey, it is what it is, and we'll just have to deal with it.
So instead of having a nice clean line with Mossman, we've decided to get the guy from South Park who puts the fibrillator on his neck and talks through that. So you'll have to bear with us though, a few technical difficulties with the connection, but for the most part I think we'll get through it. I think Billy Guyton is an interesting one, only from the perspective of he wins the strangest designation of a player award by Opta, and they've got him listed as a midfielder. So we got asked a few questions around, whether it's worth starting him in the midfield even though he's a halfback, and the answer is probably no. If it was the other way around, I think it might make a bit more sense, just from a kind of a theory point of view, but certainly not. I wouldn't want my midfielder playing halfback. Is that roughly how you'd see it, mate?
No, totally. As you said, other way around, there's some interest there at the moment. No interest at all.
So we've got Matt Duffy starting. I guess there's a few people in pre-season were quite high on him. We've got a few would you start over a little bit later on in the podcast, but how do you think he'll go? Do you roster him in your team at all? Are you going to put him in your lineup?
No. Well, I actually do own him in one particular team, and I'm not going to start him. I think there's enough guys ahead of him who showed enough last week that I'm willing to stick with those kind of guys. And I think one of them is probably playing in this game, so I don't know who the guys that you had pointed out for the start was, but I think someone like Mackay, who will be opposing, I'd probably stick with Mac.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's one of those where I guess we just don't know what Duffy's going to look like and how it's going to go. And if you've got a decent option on your bench, then I would just give it 1 week to see what it actually looks like in terms of fantasy rugby draft points.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the smart thing to do. But, it's your team. If you want to thrust it out there, you spend a high draft pick on them, then by all means. I did see that Milani Nanai is bracketed with Rieko Ioane. I don't see that a lot of places in a lot of reports, but I have seen it. So just something to be aware of. It's a Friday night game, so you'll be able to get a read on the team 60 minutes before kickoff. But just something to be aware of if you're just plugging and forgetting about it. Blake Gibson was one of the players that we talked about and had a pretty good game last week in terms of fantasy points and also on the paddock. Where would you put him in the loose forward trio? Would you start him over someone like, say, Tafua or Brad Shields, or are you still starting those two ahead of him?
So I would start Tafua over Blake Gibson, but not the line where he fits into.
Okay, all right. Interesting one is Johnny McNichol again on the bench. I don't really understand too much around Blackadder's decisions at times, and this one is a bit of a head scratcher again. I wonder if it's just as simple as a right wing versus left wing. Do you have anything more than that?
Not particularly, but it's Mackay's made a decent fist of it last week, so I guess he keeps the job. It's sort of splitting hairs to a certain extent. I mean, it's not like we ever thought that McNichol was light years ahead of Mackay. We quite like Mackay anyway. I think we just thought that Blackadder would take, I guess, perhaps the more conservative option, or perhaps the more the more well-known option, and he surprised us by not doing that. But Mackay's there, and until he has a howler, there's a good chance he'll keep that.
I think so too. I guess one player we haven't mentioned is Rene Ranger starts in the midfield with Moala, so we get to see that much vaunted midfield and see how they gel together.
Yeah, well, if the Sean Wainui versus Lau Mapi battle from pre-season is anything to go by, Rene Ranger could be a pretty strong start here.
Yeah, indeed. All right, Crusaders Blues, anything else?
Once again, Akira Ioane on the bench. Little bit of a head scratcher, I guess, but as I've said previously, I'm still prepared to take a flyer on him to get on the field and do something with the minutes that he does get.
So back to the Blake Tafua Shields question, you'd start Ioane over all those guys?
I guess it to a certain extent it depends who else I've got in there, if you know what I mean. Yep,
I do. So you're thinking that Ioane has an upside, or are you thinking if you just need 6 points from someone?
Let's say I had all three. Let's say I had Tafua, Shields and Ioane. I would take one of the first two and Ioane.
Okay. Yep, makes sense. Fair enough. All right, let's jog on to the Waratahs Brumbies. Waratahs named a settled team by the look of it. I think the only question mark I saw just before we jumped on the pod was Matt Carraro's missus appears to be about to pop, so Reece Robinson is waiting in the wings if he has to go to the hospital and put the mask on. Brumbies, fairly similar team that they thumped the Hurricanes with. I think Scott Seo comes into the lineup, but again, it's a pretty strong team. There's not much to do about this in terms of analysis. You're starting all the players you need to start. We did have one question from Andre Muller on Twitter. He's like, who would you guys pick between Duffy and Spate? And his other outside backs are Dane Haylett, Petty and D-Mac. So would you put Duffy straight in there, or is it going to be Spate?
No, I think I'd stick with Spate. I guess I've always been partial to some Spates, and I think that he's once again showed enough last week that I think he deserves to sort of stay in your team.
Yeah, I think even if you'd seen a couple of weeks of Duffy and he was scoring those points, it probably still is. And he wasn't upsetting anyone. I'd still think it probably is Spate, just a little bit more upside, I think, with him. But I guess let's see. It's the first week out. I said it's probably a little bit closer than what most people think, but I think it's still Spate at this stage. He's a bit of a known quantity, I guess. Did you want to pull anything out of this game? It's actually fairly easy from a fantasy perspective. I see Wycliffe Palu coming back, which potentially will put a dent in Jed Holloway at some point, maybe, but he may switch to lock when Thing comes on. Who really knows?
No, I think you're dead right the first time round. It's the usual suspects. You're not going to shy away from picking anybody in this game, but I think you hear in the press, which suggests it could be a bit of an arm wrestle. And sometimes the local derby games are. But that said, what are you going to do? Not pick his rifle out. Yeah,
that's right. Exactly. Okay, let's go on to the Chiefs Lions. The Lions haven't named their team as far as I was aware. I've been keeping an eye out for it. But the Chiefs have named their team. It's, again, a fairly similar team. Sean Stevenson. Doesn't sound actually as bad as I thought it was, as bad as it looked when he came off. I've heard that it's 2 or 3 weeks and he may actually go to Africa. Or maybe he's back after Africa. But it wasn't certainly the 2-monther that I thought it looked like at the time. And they've started Latu Veiano, which I don't know much about, to be honest. I see a few people have decided to pick him up, but I think you'd have to be fairly desperate to pick him up because I don't think it's going to be a long-term proposition, and you'd be a brave man to put him in without knowing too much about it. I'm not going to really talk too much about Damian McKenzie. You'd be hard-pressed to be in a position to start 3 other outside backs above him. So I think, he's a plug and play. I won't harp on it, but what are you expecting from Dima? Where do you put him in now? Based on what you saw last week and your learned opinion on whether to take kicks and go like he did, and remember it's a late afternoon game in the middle of summer at Hamilton. How do you think he'll fare? Where do you put him in the Parthenon of outside backs this week?
So I guess if you're working under the assumption that he continues in the same role that he did last week, then he's in the top 5, I would have thought, or right about there. I'm just, you're almost trying to find people to put ahead of him. And I think, Folau, obviously you put ahead of him at this stage of the season. Sevilla, I think you'd probably go and DMAC over Sevilla even.
Maybe, yep.
Yeah, I'm not saying that that's something that will carry on once Sevilla sort of slims down, according to Phil Kearns. But but you really are struggling to think of too many players that you'd want to start ahead of him.
And it doesn't matter, to be honest. I mean, we're not playing salary capping. I mean, you're very rarely going to be in a position where you have 3 other outside backs better than Damian McKenzie this weekend. That's right.
Yeah. It's generally that, choosing between, say, the third guy and maybe the 2 others you've got on the bench. That's where the decisions usually lie.
Yeah, indeed. And we did get a few. We got a few responses back from listeners suggesting why Damian McKenzie smiles as he's kicking goals. None of this can be produced on this podcast, unfortunately. But they're very, very inventive, shall we say. But it does sound like it is a mixture of 2 things, right? So it is something that he laughs, he listens to the crowd, and he tries to loosen up a bit and laugh. So kind of contrary to what other few kickers say or kicking coaches say, which is you've got to shut everything out, he's taking it in. It's a little bit different. So I don't know.
Be interesting to see how he went in the Northern Hemisphere, like somewhere like Tormund Park or somewhere where everyone just goes dead silent. Whether it just remember it freaked out Beaver, didn't it? When he was kicking against Munster that day, he said it was so quiet. I just felt everybody watching me.
Yeah, that happened a lot with Beaver. But we won't get.
It wasn't always that reason though.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's a good point. I guess we don't have much from the Lions, so there's not much more we can get into in this game. I guess Talani Sau not in the lineup was a little bit of a surprise, but Mamavai Paulu coming back into the team, I think they are nursing him back from injury. He's a good player. He'll go well. Hurricanes Highlanders. Milner Scudder's been bracketed, so another one to keep an eye on. Hopefully we have more information tomorrow. Apparently he took a bit of a knock on the leg just at the end of the game. And we referenced it on Monday's pod, but it's an absolutely devastating news for Naholo owners. Sounds like he's out until round 9, I heard, about 10 minutes ago. I guess the question, well, let's start from this angle first. Is he droppable?
Well, it depends on your situation, doesn't it?
Okay. All right. Let me frame that a bit better then. Would you drop him for? Yeah. Would you drop him for Reece Hodge, Raymond Rule, Ako Edward Ngani, Reece Robinson, or Fedders?
No, actually, no. I don't think I would.
You'd keep Naholo ahead of all those, and you'd find another way to get one of those guys on your team?
Yeah, because I think if it comes down to having to drop him to pick one of those other guys up, I think that there's probably enough options on your team to handle that. The only one that makes me think twice is Hodge, but
yeah, we'll get to that in a minute.
One of these guys that it's just one of these guys that's just been so hit and miss over the course of the history of fantasy rugby draft that he'll be on the waiver wire and picked up and dropped in probably every league 5 or 6 times.
Who was that? You cracked up a little bit. You say Raymond Rule or Ngani?
Well, actually both of them.
Yeah, okay.
So I sort of classed them together in that kind of way. It's actually interesting when you went through that list, and I was like, yeah, they're very much cut from the same mould in terms of being just hit and miss, and they're out there on the waiver wire from time to time, and they'll pop one week and someone will pick them up, and then they'll be terrible for the next 3 weeks, and you'll see them back on the waiver wire, and they're always there and just sort of tempts you, and you think, maybe I'll chase those points, and it just never works out.
Yeah, indeed. So Fedders has come in for Naholo. The other change is Squire in for Whitelock. Other way around. Whitelock in for Squire, obviously. Squire's actually gone to the bench. I thought he might have dropped out altogether, but he's gone to the bench. So he's obviously the chop to the throat wasn't as bad as we thought. And turns out it wasn't concussion, as I say, it was a chop to the throat. But just back on at Fedders, where do you... Because he's been quite a fashionable pickup late in the week after the Naholo news broke. Most people figured out that it was going to be him over Ryan Tongia. Where do you rate Fedders this week? And I'll give you a couple of... we'll play the game that we, for legal reasons, can't name. And we're actually interested to hear if you've got a name that you want to call this game, send it in. But Matt Fedders or Zach Guilford?
Guilford.
Matt Fedders or Duffy?
Duffy.
Matt Fedders or Johnny McAloy?
McAloy.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're quite down on Fedders.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it, he doesn't have any experience at this level, and I just don't think that I want to see it first, basically, I think.
Okay, fair enough. I'm a little different. I probably would have him ahead of Duffy and McAloy, not Guilford. But
okay.
Yeah, that's just sort of quite what I liked last week. And I just think that position, right wing for the Highlanders, is worth points in itself.
So, would you be prepared to take a bet on a Duffy versus Fedders?
Always.
All right.
I'm prepared to do
Let's do it then.
Straight up.
So just points on the week. Yeah.
Yep. Sounds good to me. All right. Is anything else from the Hurricanes? No Dane Coles still, which is we saw last week that it's really hard to take with the Brumbies thumping them so badly, but they didn't pick up a hell of a lot of points without Dane Coles. But there's big pluses around the hooker that they do have. And Reg Goods hopefully can pick up a few turnovers that he normally does.
Yeah, well, I mean, I heard that Dane Coles was kind of 50-50 for this game, but effectively the coach had said, well, we're not going to pick him because we're not at the stage of the season where it's that desperate, But I guess, he could possibly play if he had to, but they're going to keep him out for another week. So that's good news. And I've seen I did see the Hurricanes front row actually dropped, which is crazy, obviously. So if you're thinking about it, stop thinking about it.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. That is, it's quite knee-jerky. I did, we'll get on to the next one as well, but I saw an interesting one. Someone dropped Goromaru in one of my leagues.
Wow.
Like, okay, alright. And moving on to, just put a cap on that game, is that about it?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So Force Reds, Goromaru comes into the starting lineup. Carmichael Hunt shifts to 12. I guess now's your time. You can't be shying away from Goromaru. You put him in your team?
You are. It's interesting though. I guess just from watching him last week, and maybe it's just from watching the Reds generally. I've sort of cooled on him a little bit. You know, I'm not sure he's going to be sort of dynamic enough around the field to put him into like the top bracket. So I'm just wondering whether maybe we sort of overvalued him because we thought of the goal kicking fullback thing, but perhaps he's going to be more goal kicker, less fullback, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a really good tweet from Rich Freeman, and he said, "Which Goromaru are we going to see?" And he's got an ear on the ground. He knows Japanese players and the style of rugby they play better than anyone. And he was talking about. He said, "Which Goromaru are we going to see? The journeyman decent footballer or the Japan World Cup star?" So it'll be interesting to see. He was actually lucky not to get binned in the game against the Waratahs, where he took out, I can't remember who, it might have been Beale or Carraro, or one of those guys that were doing that counter, and he just turned his back and took him out. But didn't see a hell of a lot of electricity from him when he came on, but maybe it's just getting his feet under the table. Nick Frisby, popular pickup on the waiver wire. We'll get to the top 5 and the bottom 5, but popular pickup. Who would you... where does Frisby sit in halfbacks this week? Would you start him over any New Zealand halfback, not named TJ?
I still think I prefer TKB.
Okay. All right. Yeah. That's a 5 o'clock kickoff in New Zealand as well, so it's a little bit more conducive, they say, to hard running rugby. Let's see. I'm quite actually looking forward to that game. That should be quite a good game. Depends which Lions team turns up, right? Because when they travelled last year, they just shut up shop. And they defended like warriors, really. They were just insane.
Yeah.
The tackle counts and the tackle completion percentages were off the charts. So
that's right. It was that game against the Blue.
Yep.
Attritional, it's fair to say.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. We haven't got a Force team yet. I'm trying to think if we've had any significant injuries during the week for the Force guys. I don't think we have. It's more around the Rebels game, wasn't it? Rebels team.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so lack of any team sheet, we'll move on. We'll go to the Bulls Rebels. We talked about it previously. I think I'm going to start liking the Noel Murray if he keeps putting his team sheets out on Wednesday. Makes our job a hell of a lot easier. I guess the one big talking point from this from his team naming is Jesse Creel. So he's out. He took a knock to the head in training, I believe, wasn't it?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yep, that's what I heard.
So yeah, I guess Berger Oldendal and Jan Serpentine midfield. Not a bad backup, to be honest. That's going to be a fairly formidable team. And the Rebels are in a little bit of disarray at the moment. I think Jack Debrashini is going to be coming back from injury, but the big news of the week was Mike Harris out for 3 months. Torn quad, I believe it is, or something to do with his quad. That's a body blow, mate.
Yeah, no, it's first really, well, the second big casualty of the week. So it's been a tough week for a few managers. There's probably a few out there. Given where they were going in drafts, it's likely there's at least a few out there that have got both of them. So my sympathies go out to you.
Yeah, it is. It's tough. I guess those who drafted Debrashini must be a little bit encouraged, though, that he probably is going to get the kicking duties now for the rest of the season, which really increases his value. Was that how you see it, or do you think Reece Hodge might have a little bit of something to say about that?
Well, I guess we don't really know, have we? Because
No,
we haven't
don't.
with the full-time gig. You know, we were got the impression that he was the long range specialist. And obviously the Hodge thing has just clouded, the situation. So I'm not rushing out to get Debreczeni by any means. If I'm sort of desperate at fly half, I've been looking in other directions.
How do you feel about Warwick Hallant this week? And I guess I'll frame that question because we've got Gus Neethling sent us a tweet. Which two outside backs would you choose? Colby, Hallant, Toa, Mackay, Guildford.
Definitely Guildford.
Okay.
I think he's got to be up there. Did you say two from those guys?
Yes, two.
Probably Colby, I think.
Yep.
And a lot of that is just, these are the players that we know. It's going to be interesting to see how Gallant goes in this game, because you'd think that this should be a Bulls win, right? A home game coming off a loss, it should be. I mean, let's face it, if it's not, then you're staring down the barrel of a pretty rough season, I would have thought. So, it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back. Be interesting to see how they game plan for it, what kind of style. I mean, you talked about how they didn't seem to know what kind of team they wanted to be. Well, they don't have Jesse Krill to go to now, so maybe it's time for someone like Gallant to step.
Yep.
If I had him in my team and I was sort of wavering over it, I think I'd probably stick him in. If I was someone a bit more journeyman-like. Yeah.
Yeah. So I said Colby and Hallant. I had Hallant over Guildford, but that's purely based on matchup and being at home. I think one outing that he had last week will be good for him. That was his first Super Rugby game. I think he'll take quite a little confidence, even though that it wasn't a particularly good result or a performance. I think having those minutes under his belt, he'll feel a little bit more comfortable back at home. So that's where I went for it. But yeah, you're probably right. Those are pretty good options. Pretty good options you have there. Gus. Anything else from this game? We haven't got a Rebels team yet, and we haven't got a Bulls team. Oh, sorry, we have got a Bulls team. We haven't got a Rebels team yet, so it makes it quite difficult to... I think Colby Fainga was out for 3 months as well. That came in the same thing as Harris, but yeah, we don't know much more. We'll touch on Hodge a little bit later when we go through the free agents pickups for this week. Then the next two games we don't have team sheets for. So the Cheetahs Stormers, I've heard that Cobus van Wyk may be out for a little bit of time as well, which means Zas is going to make an appearance. I suspect he'll play on the wing, but he's listed as a midfield in Fantasy Rugby Draft, so I think that's good. I'm prepared to have a bit of a roll of the dice. In a couple of my leagues, I have room to roll the dice at a midfield. So I'm picking him up and having a little bit of a run with him. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with that theory. I think it's a fairly solid one. Midfielder is pretty thin, so chances are there's a lot of people scrambling around trying to find a second midfielder, and chances are it's not going to get you very much. At least somebody on the wing is likely to get you, a few extra points. So I think it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, and by the time that you're listening to this podcast, the Stormers would have announced their team or very close to announcing their team. So before you blindly go and add them to your team, just make sure that information is correct, that Cobus is actually up for a wee bit and Zas is taking the starting lineup. One question we had from Sam Konoski via email was Robert Dupree or Joe Peterson? I was going to say, so Jags and Sharks and Jags is who Joe Peterson's playing, and obviously Dupree in this game.
I guess I'd sort of ride the wave a little bit with Dupree. Yeah, I just kind of think there might be a little bit something to that. But it's a tough one. I can understand both sides, but I just wonder whether there's probably more points on offer in that game. So
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Does matchup come into this, Jags versus Cheetahs?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. And I just read an article about Fred Zerlinger, and apparently there was a technical. It was from Brendan No, actually, Supersport. He said that there's a technicality in Fred Zerlinger's planting foot. He was just a little bit too keen. The adrenaline was pumping, and it was a little too close to the ball when he was hooking it. So,
yeah, because I went back and watched the replay of this, having not seen much rugby, and you were talking about Elton Yanksy's being one of the worst kicks you'd ever seen. Well, the first kick I saw from Zalinga was a shocker as well, because it was right out in front, and I think it might have hit the corner flag. So, I don't know. I guess I'm not really a believer in Zalinga at this point, anyway.
No, neither am I. But I just want to put an asterisk that they're going to be in a lot of high-scoring games. Well, it certainly looks like that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, he did score that try when they were down to 13 players.
True.
And effectively, he ran in untouched because there was just nobody left on the blind side.
Yeah, that's right. So we don't usually talk about them. They're fairly unfancied, but let's have a look at some locks. So Itzebeth was the top point scorer last week for locks, but in terms of ranking them, where would you rank Skelton, Diaga, Yanis, Itzebeth, and Jed Holloway?
I think you'd probably stick with Skelton just because he's got that pedigree, and he's
repeatable.
Yeah, and he's done it before. I think probably Holloway might actually be next, just on the sheer volume of kind of carries he's getting, and playing number 8. He might be taking a few kicks and getting a few sort of extra meters out of that, running those back. With the other guys, I mean, with Diaga, I think sometimes discipline's a problem, and
tough matchup for Diaga as well.
Yeah. So, and I like Itzebeth as a player, but as a fantasy option, he's not necessarily anything special. So I'll probably go Skelton, Holloway, Yanis, and then Itzebeth.
Yeah, I was surprised when I went back and I did a little bit of looking on the internet to see how well Itzebeth actually scored in locks, and he scored 18 points in the weekend against I don't think it was a poor Bulls team, but they did get up a wee bit. But watching the game live, he was in a lot of play, and that's why I thought I probably would go Jed top, and I know that's a bit bolshy, and then probably Itzebeth, and then Skelton. I put Itzebeth up near the top there because of the matchup against the Stormers. I think you'll see him roaming a lot, and it's kind of the old Buck. I say old, he's pretty young himself, but the old Buck versus Diaga going head to head type thing. So I think he'll rise to that. In the Sharks Jags game. So we just talked about Joe Peterson, obviously Willie LaRue you're starting. Where does Mvovo fit in those that I talked about? So if we look at Mvovo, Faddes, Hodge, Raw, Ndungane, Robinson if he starts, Duffy. Where does Mvovo sit in all of that?
I guess he's a funny one as well, because I think 2 seasons ago he was right up there amongst the top scorers, and then faded a little bit, and I guess just become another one of those sort of slightly inconsistent players. So I think he's a cut above them all, probably a slightly classier player, and so I guess I'd probably put him.
So I'll repeat that list again. It's Faddes, Hodge, Raw, Ndungane, Reece Robinson, Zach Guildford, Duffy, Mackay. Would you start Mvovo over all of those?
No.
No? Okay, where's the line?
No. I still like Guildford more. I think I like Mackay more. He's probably in the middle of that pack.
Okay.
But I guess he's a better version perhaps of some of the other hit and miss wingers, the Raymond Rule types.
Sure. Okay. So we had a question from friend of the podcast, Justin Pivus. He's got, it says start bench, Duffy, Mackay, Tuchelet or Nabuli. So I guess rank those guys.
Well, you're not starting Nabuli, I think.
I don't think so either.
You are starting all the others, yeah. So if that's the question, if those are your 3 outside backs, then of course if his question is, chances are
it's ranking them. Yeah, he's got better options.
he's got better options. So I guess it would be, who was the second one?
So it's Duffy, Mackay, Tuchelet, and then Nabuli. I
guess it's probably kind of leaning towards Tuchelet,
that's what I was
Mackay.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's mine. I went Tuchelet, I went Mackay, Duffy, Nabuli.
Yeah, okay, yep.
We don't have any team sheets for either of those, so I guess we'll move swiftly along. Do you have anything more to pull out from this game? Sans a team sheet?
No, I don't. But yeah, I mean, once again, it's just another. I'm really intrigued with watching the Jags at the moment. You know, it's just, I think it's a good story. I mean, there's been some criticism of the competition, you know, and the format of it and everything, but, yeah, I mean, I will definitely be keeping an eye out for them. You know, I'm sort of just really interested to see how they go.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fantasy points in that team, and I'll be interested to see how they go back home as well.
Yep.
Starting off touring is not always the easiest thing to do, so let's see how they go against a bit more of a formidable team in the Sharks. So a trade that I wanted to throw at you just as a bit of a change up. James Lowe, Sefa Naholo for Tamanavulu and Mapoe.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because this is obviously factoring in the injury thing, isn't it? So,
layers of layers.
Yeah, it is. You know, it's one of those ones where there's a number of different ways to look at it, and also we're trying to look at it in a vacuum without seeing, you know, who else people have on their squads. I guess that I would say the Tamanavulu, Mapoe trade. I'd probably take Mapoe. I'd probably take that side of the trade, I think.
Is that because we just have no idea about Naholo at the moment? It could be significant.
Yeah, it is. I mean, let's face it, it's not about talent. If it was, we'd probably go the other way. It's kind of like it's a bird in the hand, I guess, as much as anything else.
Yep, nope, that's fair. You win now, absolutely. Let's look at some free agent pickups for the week. So we'll talk about ownership percentages, and when we talk about they've increased from such and such to such and such, we're not saying, you know, so for instance, Reece Hodge was 2% owned, and he is now 41% owned. So he's increased 38% points. He hasn't increased 38%, he's increased 38% points. So he was the number one. Can you get the next four?
Well, Frisbee will definitely be one.
Number two?
Yep. Yeah, because we talked about him. I guess Rule will be up there because once again, yeah, he's a guy that will.
He's increased 22 points. He's now 80% owned.
Yeah, great. He'll be in people's teams to break their hearts in a couple of weeks' time. So that's, we'll see him back on the other side of this list, I guess, probably in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. Yeah. And maybe Zillinger.
Zillinger's number 9 on the list.
Okay. All right.
There's a midfielder from the Crusaders. He's number 3. Kieran Fonatere. He's increased his ownership percentage from 10% up to 38%.
Yeah. Oh, and of course Blake Gibson.
Yeah, and he's number 4.
I guess that's an obvious one as well. Yeah, so
absolutely.
I guess I think my overall takeaway from this whole crop this week is they're a fairly uninspiring bunch. I don't think we've seen the emergence of anybody in week 1 that's necessarily going to go on and win you leagues. Obviously, a lot of them have been picked up. You know, based on the points and they've sort of been hot property. I've been kind of quite happy to steer clear of them this week, and hoping that maybe something a bit more, long-term will emerge. And so, you know, you can sort of, spank your, waiver claim, on one of these guys, but I actually think maybe holding on to it and using it, you know, in the coming weeks is possibly a better option. But at the same time, I understand if you're struggling in certain positions, then yeah, absolutely, like you need to go and fill it, but don't feel the need to just churn your team over just for the sake of it.
Yeah, especially after game week 1 as well. And there's a lot of names on this list which I like to think of kind of as squad fillers or you know, will just give you that few extra points. Like Nick Frisbee's a good one against who you probably had in your team as a halfback. If you look at some of the drop players that people are on the ball and you know, the 38% of people who picked up Reece Hodge could look like geniuses next week on Monday when we have this conversation, and he's taking the kicks at the poles for the rest of the season, and he's the fullback. So let's see.
Yeah, but you know, there's guys on this list like Horwitz who scored some points last week, but he's listed as a fly half, but he's not going to play fly half. He's going to play midfield. There's got to be better options out there than him. So if you see those points and you think, oh yeah, there's a fly half that can score some points, you've got to look at how he scored them, and he scored them mainly from the try that he scored. And so, that's when you fly half, you want someone a bit more dependable than that.
Yep, agreed. Can you guess who the most dropped player was?
It's an interesting one. So, the obvious ones are always guys that were injured.
Yeah, it's actually not someone who's injured, so yeah.
Okay. Let me think about this. No, I don't know.
It's a bit of an obvious one when you think of it. It's Aiden Tower.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So he's been dropped. He's dropped 11 points. His ownership was 21%. It's now down to 10%.
Yeah, that makes sense. I should have been thinking of people who'd had shockers rather than people who got injured. So
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's going to look pretty stupid when he comes out and scores 35 points this week against the Waratahs.
It's inevitable. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's an absolute certainty. Death and taxes. Aiden Tower scoring this week.
Yeah, and the blame will go entirely on you, which is
absolutely
which is awesome. Yeah.
So that'll be 2 weeks. So I'll get it wrong first week for recommending him, and then the other way.
It's rock paper scissors. You just stick with rock.
That's right.
Just rock off every time.
The second most dropped player was Geronimo, which I thought was a bit harsh. De La Fuente. And I think that's mainly because people can't pronounce it, and when they're in the pub, they want to ask who's their midfielder, and they'll be like, well, Charlie Natoi.
Yeah, or the alternative is that they picked him up because they thought it was a kick-ass name, like his name's Geronimo, and then they sort of realised perhaps he's not as good as they hoped.
That's true. That's probably a more likely scenario. And the third most dropped, which I thought was a bit harsh, is Kyle Godwin. But I wonder if that potentially was injury-related because he got a little bit of a knock as well. Number 4th on this list is outrageous for me, is Boom Prinsloo.
Yeah, I did see him dropped in a few leagues. I think it's just one of those things where perhaps people who haven't played previously and don't know that he has a bit of a track record in fantasy rugby draft, possibly just abandoning ship a bit too soon.
Yeah, I think so. We are kind of splitting hairs there. He was only down from 98 down to 92.
No, sure, okay, yeah.
But it's still,
I have seen him dropped, so yeah, yep.
Okay. All right. If anyone wants to know a bit more of these stats, we've got them online. We haven't published on the site or anything, but we do capture the starting percentage and also the ownership percentage and the differences between each of the game weeks. And as we've just kind of alluded to, some of them are quite interesting, some of them are knee-jerk, and some of them have rhyme or reason or injury-based, or some of it's just performance. So yeah, we'll keep doing that, and we'll bring it to you next Thursday as well. All right, so probably about all the time we have. The last thing I want to ask you, Mossman, actually, first of all, you can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Rug Draft. That's Fantasy OG Draft, and Mossman's on at Nathan Mossman. And I guess still, if we're still pumping that junk mail, we still need to for folks to add us as a contact or to mark as not spam. We're still seeing a lot of people emailing saying, a lot of my stuff's going to my folder. I didn't see that trade request, or I didn't know that this person was dropped so that I couldn't pick them up. So please just add us as a contact or mark as not spam. It's the only way that the email exchanges understand or figure out that we're not spam. For the player of the week, so I'm batting 0 for 1 and you're 1 for 1 in your player of the week. So I think we should just frame how we want to present our player of the week, in that it has to be less than 65% owned. It's no good to you saying that Beauden Barrett's going to have a good game, or you should start Israel Folau. That doesn't do anyone any favours. So we want to give you, or try to, or attempt to give you a player that probably isn't starting, that you probably have sitting on your bench, that you might want to consider starting over some of the more fancied players. So we'll say 65% and less owned. Mossman, who are you running with this week?
I think this could be the week for Warwick Haaland. Yep, I think so. He's probably someone that would be on the cusp of a lot of people's teams. They'll be wondering whether to start him. I think he's worth a start this week. I think there could be some backlash. They'll also be looking for probably a little bit of an inspiration without Jesse Creel there, and it could be the week that he steps up.
Good shout. I like that. I had him on my radar as well. So he's 95% owned, but he's only started in 15% of leagues. So there's a great example of someone that you might want to start throwing into that third outside back conversation. When I started doing this afternoon, I initially thought Chelsea Colby. but he doesn't qualify for the 65%. He's started in most leagues, and I think it's up in the 90s somewhere. So I'm going to go for Naholo's replacement. I'm going to go with Matt Fedez. I had thought about doing Zealand Zas for the Stormers, but A, he's not sure if he's starting, and B, it's just a little bit too cool, a little bit too out there, especially after tanking my first pick of Aiden Toa. So we'll go with Matt Fedez in that right wing spot, and he's only owned in 5% of leagues at the moment. Now that'll change overnight because a lot of players will see that Highlanders lineup, and he's only started in 1.3% of leagues. So a couple of good examples there. Let's see how they pan out. Hopefully a little bit better, certainly from my perspective from last week, which I'd like to take the time to apologise for again. But yeah, let's have bigger and brighter things. Okay, that's probably about the time we have for today. Thanks for downloading and listening. I'm Bruce Wilkinson. He's Nathan Mossman.
Go Aiden Toa.
To your repeater.
What a bust here by Christian Cullen. Plenty of support, and what a double!